The rain drummed against the window pane in steady, rhythmic beats as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the financial report sprawled across my laptop screen. The numbers blurred together, meaningless now after everything that had happened. My mind wasn't on the quarterly earnings or the expansion plans I'd been so meticulously crafting for months. It was consumed by a betrayal so deep it felt like it might swallow me whole. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. A text from an unknown number late one evening. Just 3 simple words. Check your account. At first, I dismissed it as spam, but something about the timing gnawed at me. It was Friday night, and I'd already been working overtime all week, trying to finalize the budget for the next quarter. Against my better judgment, I pulled up my banking app. What I saw made my blood run cold. Over $50,000 gone.
Just like that.
My stomach churned as I scrolled through the transactions, each withdrawal larger than the last, stretching back weeks. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing, covering their tracks with meticulous precision. But one thing stood out among the chaos: the beneficiary's name. Lila. My sister. I stared at her name on the screen, disbelief warring with anger inside me. Lila and I hadn't always seen eye to eye, but we weren't strangers either. We'd grown up together, shared bedrooms and secrets, fought over toys and boys. Somewhere along the way, though, our bond had fractured. Life took us in different directions, and while I built my career and independence, she seemed content to coast, relying on others to prop her up. Still, I never imagined she'd stoop this low. Shaking off the initial shock, I called the bank immediately. Their fraud department assured me they'd investigate, but there was little they could do without more evidence. They advised me to file a police report, which only added another layer of frustration to an already unbearable situation. By the time I hung up, my hands were trembling and my chest felt tight with rage. But anger wouldn't solve anything, not yet. First, I needed answers. And those answers would come from Lila herself. The next morning, I drove to her apartment, located in a modest complex on the outskirts of town. As I parked my car, I noticed her silver sedan sitting outside, its windows fogged with condensation. Good. She was home. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the printouts of the transactions I'd prepared overnight and headed toward her door. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the hallway. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Lila in a rumpled tank top and sweatpants. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. For a second, guilt flickered within me. Maybe I'd misread the situation. Maybe this was some kind of mistake. "Sophie," she said, her voice groggy. "What are you doing here?" I held up the papers, letting them flutter slightly in my grip. "We need to talk." Her expression shifted instantly, any lingering sleepiness replaced by a flash of panic. "Talk about what?" "About this," I replied, shoving the documents into her hands. "Explain these withdrawals, Lila. Explain why my money is suddenly in your account." She scanned the pages quickly, her face paling with every line she read. When she looked up, her gaze darted around the room, searching for an escape route. "Sophie, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You drained my savings, Lila. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that money? How long it took me to save it?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she blurted out, taking a step back. "It was supposed to be temporary, I swear." "Temporary?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think stealing $50,000 is temporary? Are you insane?" "No, listen," she pleaded, raising her hands as if to ward off my fury. "Things got bad, okay? Really bad. I lost my job and the rent was due and, I don't know, I panicked. I thought I could pay you back before you even noticed. And instead, you let it go on for weeks," I said bitterly. "Months, maybe. How long have you been siphoning off my money, Lila?" She hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she mumbled, "Since January."
January.
That meant she'd been doing this for nearly 6 months. 6 months of lying, deceiving, betraying me. The weight of it hit me like a physical blow, leaving me reeling. I sank onto the nearest chair, my head spinning. "How could you?" I whispered, mostly to myself. How could you do this to me? Lila knelt in front of me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Sophie. I am so sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. Please give me a chance to make it right. Make it right? The idea was laughable. There was no undoing what she'd done, no erasing the damage. Not just financially, but emotionally too. This wasn't just about the money, it was about trust, about family, about everything we once shared. And now, it was shattered beyond repair. But even as anger burned hot in my veins, a part of me wondered, could I forgive her? Or was this the breaking point, the moment where I finally cut ties for good? Over the following days, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Lila's apology seemed genuine enough. She promised to repay every cent, offered to sell her car if necessary, and even suggested moving out to reduce expenses. On the other hand, her actions spoke louder than her words. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, or possibly ever. Meanwhile, the investigation into the fraud continued. The bank confirmed that the transfers had indeed been authorized using my credentials, meaning someone close to me must have gained access to my information. While the evidence pointed squarely at Lila, proving intent would require more than circumstantial details. Still, the authorities agreed to keep the case open, pending further developments. As for me, I threw myself into work, determined to rebuild what she'd taken. Long hours turned into longer ones, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. Slowly but surely, I began clawing my way back, refusing to let her victory stand unchallenged. Yet beneath the surface, resentment simmered, waiting for its moment to boil over. One evening, as I left the office, I received a call from an unexpected source, Aunt Clara, our mother's sister. She rarely reached out unless it was urgent, so when her name appeared on my phone, I answered immediately. Clara? Is everything okay? There was a pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. Sophie, sweetheart, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but your father's in trouble. My heart skipped a beat. What kind of trouble? It's Lila, Clara explained, her voice laced with concern. She's been gambling, Sophie.
Big time.
Your father found out recently and tried to help, but she owes people money, serious money. Dangerous people.
Gambling.
Of course. That explained the desperation, the lies, the theft. Lila hadn't stolen my money because she wanted to buy a new car or take a vacation. She'd done it to feed an addiction that threatened to destroy her life, and ours by extension. What does Dad want me to do? I asked, bracing myself for whatever came next. He doesn't want you involved, Clara admitted. But I thought you deserved to know. If things escalate, you might find yourself dragged into it whether you like it or not. I thanked her for the warning and ended the call, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront Lila again, demand answers about her debts and who she owed. Another part wanted to wash my hands of the entire mess, sever all ties, and focus solely on protecting myself. But deep down, I knew neither option was entirely feasible. Family ties ran deep, tangled roots that refused to break no matter how much effort you put into untangling them. And so, the question remained, what would I do next? Would I fight to save Lila, despite everything she'd done? Or would I walk away, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, whatever path I chose, it wouldn't be easy. And it certainly wouldn't be quick. Days stretched into weeks, and the tension between Lila and me grew palpable. She attempted to reach out several times, sending apologetic messages and voicemails filled with promises of change. Each attempt only served to remind me of her betrayal, reigniting the flames of anger I'd worked so hard to suppress. Then came the letter, a certified envelope delivered directly to my office. Inside was a formal summons, notifying me of a court hearing scheduled for 2 weeks hence. Attached was a petition filed by none other than Lila, seeking mediation to resolve our financial dispute. Apparently, she believed talking things out under legal supervision would lead to a resolution favorable to both parties. Favorable to both parties? The audacity of the suggestion left me speechless. Did she truly think I'd sit across from her, calmly discussing how to divide the spoils of her crime? Or was this merely another tactic, another way to manipulate the situation to her advantage? Regardless, I couldn't ignore the summons. Ignoring legal proceedings carried its own risks, and I wasn't about to give her ammunition to use against me. So, I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena Martinez, and prepared for battle. Elena reviewed the case thoroughly, gathering evidence to support my claim of fraud. Bank statements, transaction logs, security footage from ATMs, all of it painted a damning picture of Lila's activities. With this arsenal at our disposal, we entered the courtroom confident in our position. The day of the hearing arrived, and the atmosphere inside the chamber crackled with tension. Lila sat across from me, flanked by her own attorney, looking smaller and less defiant than usual. When the judge called the case to order, both sides presented their arguments. Mine focused on the facts: unauthorized transfers, deliberate deception, and outright theft. Hers centered on mitigating factors: financial hardship, personal struggles, and a plea for leniency. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering Lila to repay the stolen funds in full, plus interest, within a specified time frame. Failure to comply would result in additional penalties, including potential jail time. It wasn't justice, not really, but it was closure. Or so I thought. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy after the trial, though nothing felt quite the same. Work consumed most of my days, providing a welcome distraction from lingering doubts and unresolved feelings. Occasionally, I wondered how Lila was faring, whether she'd managed to turn her life around or continued spiraling downward. But I forced myself not to dwell on it. Her choices were hers alone, and I refused to let them define me any longer. That resolve was tested one evening when another call came, not from Lila, but from Dad. His voice trembled with urgency as he relayed news that sent chills down my spine. Lila had disappeared. Not just gone missing, but vanished without a trace, abandoning her apartment, her car, and everything she owned. Rumors swirled about unpaid debts and threats from creditors, leading many to believe she'd fled to avoid facing the music. Dad begged me to intervene, to use my resources to track her down. Reluctantly, I agreed, hiring a private investigator to follow leads and piece together her movements. What we uncovered shocked everyone involved and changed everything once again. Would I continue helping her, knowing the truth? Or would I finally draw the line, letting her face the consequences of her actions alone? The decision loomed before me, fraught with uncertainty and emotion. And as always, the answer wasn't clear-cut. But one thing was certain: whatever choice I made, it would shape the rest of my life, and perhaps hers as well. The private investigator's report arrived a week later, delivered to my office in a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, scanning the pages filled with notes, photos, and financial records. Each line brought a fresh wave of disbelief, anger, and something else, a flicker of pity that I couldn't quite suppress. Lila hadn't just run away, she'd been forced out. The debts she owed weren't merely to local loan sharks, but to a network of organized criminals who operated in the shadows. According to the investigator, they had been pressuring her for months, escalating their demands until she could no longer keep up. When she failed to meet a critical deadline, they made an example of her, destroying her car, ransacking her apartment, and leaving cryptic warnings on her voicemail. But there was more, much more. Among the documents was a copy of a contract Lila had signed without fully understanding its implications. In exchange for a large sum of money, she had agreed to act as a middleman for illegal transactions, funneling funds through accounts she'd known, including mine. It wasn't just greed that had driven her to steal from me, it was desperation, born of fear and coercion. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, I'd believed Lila acted solely out of selfishness, never considering the larger forces at play. Now, staring at the evidence, I understood the truth. She was trapped, caught in a web far beyond her control. And while her actions were still unforgivable, the circumstances surrounding them cast a different light on the situation. Still, sympathy only went so far. If what the investigator said was true, Lila wasn't just in trouble, she was in grave danger. The people she owed wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and if she couldn't pay, they'd come after anyone connected to her, including me. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to cut ties completely, to protect myself and move forward with my life. After all, why should I risk everything for someone who had betrayed me so deeply? But another part, the part that remembered late-night talks and childhood laughter, couldn't ignore the fact that Lila was family. No matter how broken our relationship had become, she was still my sister. In the end, I made the call. Not because I forgave her, not yet, but because I couldn't live with myself if something happened to her, and I did nothing to help. I hired additional security for my home and office, ensuring that whoever was after Lila wouldn't find me easily. Then, using the investigators' contacts, I reached out to law enforcement, providing them with every detail I had uncovered. They promised to look into the case, though they warned me not to expect miracles. Dealing with organized crime was dangerous work, and resources were limited. Meanwhile, I began searching for Lila myself. The investigator had traced her last known location to a small town several states away, where she had rented a room under an alias. From there, the trail went cold, but I refused to give up. Every lead, no matter how faint, deserved pursuit. Every possibility, no matter how remote, needed exploration. Days turned into weeks, and the search grew increasingly frustrating. Just when I thought I was closing in, new obstacles appeared. False leads, dead ends, and mounting expenses tested my resolve, but I pushed forward, driven by a mix of guilt, responsibility, and stubborn determination. Finally, after nearly 2 months, I received a breakthrough. A tip from one of the investigators' informants led us to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of a rural town. There, hidden behind false IDs and locked doors, we found her. She looked different, older, thinner, haunted by the events that had unfolded over the past year. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me, as if she hadn't expected anyone to care enough to look for her. "Sophie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I told you I'd find you," I said, my tone firmer than I felt. "Now, let's get out of here, before those people do." Getting Lila to safety proved easier said than done. The criminal organization hunting her wasn't about to let her slip away without a fight. We moved quickly, relocating to a secure facility arranged by law enforcement. There, Lila gave a full statement, detailing everything she knew about the operation and the individuals involved. Her cooperation earned her some leniency, though she still faced charges for her role in the scheme. As for me, the experience left me changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. Helping Lila hadn't erased the pain of her betrayal, nor had it restored the trust between us. But it had reminded me of something important. Family isn't always perfect, and love doesn't mean ignoring flaws or mistakes. Sometimes, it means choosing to stand by someone even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Over time, Lila and I began rebuilding our relationship, one tentative step at a time. It wasn't easy, and progress was slow, but we both recognized the value of second chances. For her, it meant facing the consequences of her actions and working toward redemption. For me, it meant learning to forgive, not just her, but myself for letting resentment consume me for so long. And so we moved forward, together yet apart, bound by blood and history, striving to create a future neither of us could have imagined alone. Months later, sitting in my apartment on a quiet evening, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The stolen money, the lies, the fear. All of it seemed distant now, softened by perspective and time. Life hadn't returned to normal exactly, but it had found a new rhythm, one shaped by lessons learned and choices made. As I closed the blinds against the falling rain, I heard the familiar ringtone of my phone. Glancing at the screen, I smiled faintly. It was Lila, calling for the first time in weeks. "Hey," I answered, my voice steady. "Hey, Sophie," she replied, her tone hesitant but hopeful. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said, settling back into my chair. "What's on your mind?" And as we spoke, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were finally starting to heal. Together. The line remained open, carrying whispers of forgiveness, understanding, and hope into the night.